For nearly a century, the National Firearms Act, or NFA, has dictated what Americans can own, shaping the landscape of gun rights and regulations in the United States. Passed in 1934, the NFA was one of the first major federal gun control laws, and its impact has echoed through generations. It didn't just regulate firearms, it fundamentally changed the relationship between citizens and their government when it comes to the right to bear arms. The law wasn't crafted primarily to stop crime, as many might assume. Instead, it was designed to exert control over the public, setting a precedent for how the government could limit access to certain items by labeling them as dangerous or unnecessary. The NFA specifically targeted items like firearm suppressors, short-barreled rifles and machine guns, not because they were widely used by criminals, but because bureaucrats and lawmakers decided they posed a threat. The decision was less about evidence and more about perception and power. Take suppressors, for example. Despite what Hollywood might show, suppressors don't silence guns. They simply reduce the noise, much like a muffler on a car. They make shooting safer for hearing but don't make firearms undetectable or silent. Yet the government made them incredibly difficult to obtain. To legally own a suppressor, you had to submit fingerprints, provide a passport photo, fill out extensive paperwork, pay a hefty $200 tax, and then wait months, or even years, for approval. This process was intentionally burdensome, designed to discourage ordinary people from even trying. That $200 tax, when first imposed in 1934, was a staggering sum, equivalent to over $4,000 today. It was a financial barrier meant to keep suppressors, and other regulated items, out of reach for all but the wealthiest Americans. The tax wasn't about revenue, it was about restriction. The NFA created a barrier to a constitutional right, all built on the myth that suppressors and similar devices were tools for criminals. In reality, most crimes were committed with ordinary firearms, not the items the NFA targeted. Ironically, in many European countries with far stricter gun laws overall, suppressors are easy to buy, and even encouraged for safety reasons. Hunters and sport shooters use them to protect their hearing and reduce noise pollution, and they're seen as a responsible accessory rather than a threat. But in the United States, law-abiding citizens have faced a confusing maze of red tape, high costs, and long waits, just to own a device that could help protect their hearing and make shooting safer for everyone nearby. The real purpose of the NFA was to set a powerful precedent that the federal government could make constitutional rights conditional, expensive, and difficult to exercise. It was about establishing control, not just over guns, but over the very idea of what rights Americans could freely enjoy. For 90 years, this system has stood, shaping the lives of gun owners and influencing every debate about firearms in America. But now, after decades of legal challenges and shifting public opinion, the foundation of the NFA is finally starting to crack. The once unshakable foundation of the National Firearms Act is beginning to crumble, opening the door to a new era of debate and potential reform in American gun laws. Today, everything changed. In a landmark moment that will be remembered for generations, the Supreme Court delivered a decision that sent shockwaves through the legal and political landscape. The Supreme Court unanimously struck down the NFA's suppressor provisions, 9-0. Not a single justice dissented, making this one of the most decisive rulings in recent memory. Every justice agreed, treating a safety device like a weapon is unconstitutional. Their consensus was clear and unwavering, sending a powerful message about the limits of government regulation. The court declared suppressors are accessories, not firearms, and serve a vital safety function. They emphasized that suppressors are designed to protect hearing, not to make firearms more dangerous. The government, they said, has no reason to make it hard for citizens to protect their hearing. The justices highlighted the importance of public health and safety, noting that suppressors reduce noise pollution and prevent hearing loss. The tax and registration scheme was deemed an absurd, unconstitutional burden. The court found that these requirements placed unnecessary obstacles in the path of law-abiding citizens violating their constitutional rights. This ruling is the first major crack in the NFA's foundation in nearly a century. For decades, the NFA stood as a pillar of federal gun regulation, but today, that foundation has been shaken. It questions the federal government's authority to regulate firearms this way. The decision opens the door for future challenges to other restrictive laws, signaling a potential shift in the balance of power. The court affirmed, the Second Amendment is not a second-class right. Americans' right to keep and bear arms must be treated with the same respect as any other constitutional freedom. The message to Washington is clear. There are limits to government power. Lawmakers and officials must now reconsider how far they can go in restricting constitutional rights. The unanimous decision devastates the gun control lobby. It can't be dismissed as partisan. With every justice in agreement, the ruling carries undeniable weight and legitimacy. The highest court agreed, the government went too far. This historic decision will shape the future of gun rights and government authority for years to come. The Department of Justice, often seen as the nation's top law enforcement agency, played a surprising and pivotal role in this unfolding story, one that few could have predicted at the outset. In a move that sent shockwaves through legal and political circles, the DOJ reversed its long-held stance just before the Supreme Court case. For years, it had defended the National Firearms Act's suppressor rules, but now, it openly admitted that these regulations were simply indefensible under the law. For decades, administrations from both major parties had stood behind the NFA, treating its provisions as settled law. But this time, the DOJ broke ranks, refusing to defend what it now saw as an unconstitutional restriction. The department's legal team took a hard look at the actual text of the Second Amendment, as well as recent Supreme Court precedents. Their conclusion was clear. The tax and registration scheme for suppressors could not be squared with the Constitution's guarantee of the right to keep and bear arms. This rare and candid admission stripped the government's case of its main defense, leaving the opposition stunned and the legal landscape forever altered. The DOJ's honesty and willingness to follow the law, rather than political pressure, paved the way for the Supreme Court's unanimous decision, a decision that would echo across the nation. In a time when government agencies are often accused of playing politics, this moment stood out. It showed that even within the highest levels of government, there are still those who put the Constitution above partisan interests and personal agendas. Critics from both sides of the aisle were quick to call the DOJ's move a betrayal, accusing it of abandoning its duty. But in reality, the department was simply doing what it was created to do: uphold the law, even when it's unpopular or inconvenient. This wasn't about caving to outside pressure or shifting with the political winds. It was about returning to first principles, recognizing that the rule of law must come before politics, and that constitutional rights are not negotiable. The government's power is not unlimited. It is bound by the Constitution. The people's rights must always be respected, no matter how controversial the issue or how strong the opposition. The DOJ's move was critical, signaling a profound shift in how federal power is viewed and exercised. It sent a message that the government is not above the law and that its actions must always be justified by the Constitution. This decision set the stage for a legal and cultural turning point, sparking debates in courtrooms, classrooms, and living rooms across America about the true meaning of constitutional rights. The executive branch's public admission carried immense weight, influencing not just the outcome of this case, but also the way future administrations might approach similar issues. The result was a clear and unambiguous path for the Supreme Court to restore constitutional rights, reminding the nation that, at its best, the law stands above politics, and justice prevails when principle guides action. Gun rights supporters responded with celebration. Groups like the NRA and Firearms Policy Coalition called the decision historic. For years, they argued suppressors are safety tools, not sinister weapons. Today, their arguments were vindicated at the highest level. The ruling is more than a win, it's a turning point. It sets a precedent for challenging other NFA restrictions. Gun rights groups are already planning new lawsuits, aiming to dismantle more of the NFA. The Supreme Court affirmed the Second Amendment is the law of the land. Now, these organizations are on the offensive, fighting to restore rights for all Americans. Even before the Supreme Court's decision, Congress had voted to eliminate the $200 NFA tax stamp for suppressors and short-barreled firearms. This legislative move, set for 2026, marked the first rollback of the NFA's power in 90 years. Lawmakers from both parties agreed. The tax was outdated and punitive. Years of advocacy by groups like the American Suppressor Association paid off. The Supreme Court's decision makes the tax moot for suppressors, but Congress's action still matters. It shows a political shift toward freedom and away from punishing law-abiding gun owners. The tax's end will make suppressors and other NFA items more accessible to average Americans. Congress and the court have both concluded it's time to stop penalizing responsible gun owners. The suppressor market is about to explode. With regulations gone and the tax eliminated, millions of gun owners will finally buy suppressors. Demand is expected to surge, transforming the industry overnight. Manufacturers face a challenge, ramping up production after a year of slow sales. Initial shortages and backorders are likely as companies scramble to meet demand, but in the long run, competition will drive innovation and lower prices. Suppressors will become mainstream, safer, and more affordable. The public health benefit is huge. Shooting will be safer for everyone. The market is on the verge of a revolution. Millions of Americans will soon enjoy safer, quieter shooting. The Supreme Court's decision on suppressors shakes the entire NFA. Gun rights groups now argue, if the tax is gone and suppressors are protected, what's left to justify federal regulation? They contend that remaining NFA requirements, registration, long waits, ATF forms, are now unconstitutional. The next target's short-barreled rifles and shotguns. Congress has already voted to remove the tax on these too. The legal dominoes are falling, with the ultimate goal being the NFA's complete repeal. Gun rights advocates see the NFA as an outdated relic meant to harass, not protect. The Supreme Court has opened the door to total deregulation of NFA items. Even if the NFA falls, the fight shifts to the states. Federal repeal doesn't legalize suppressors everywhere. States set their own rules. Some states ban suppressors outright, those bans remain. In others, laws tie legality to NFA compliance, so repeal could create confusion or even accidental bans. Lawmakers will need to act fast to clarify state laws. The result? A patchwork of rules with rights varying by zip code. Gun owners and manufacturers will face a complex legal landscape. Gun rights groups must now fight 50 state battles to secure freedom everywhere. The struggle moves from Washington to state capitals. A federal victory is just the start of a new, local fight for rights. What does this mean for America's gun owners? Profound change. The old order is collapsing. The Supreme Court, Congress, and DOJ have all shifted the landscape. The government's power to restrict Second Amendment rights has been dealt a major blow. Suppressors will become common, shooting safer, and rights more accessible. The ruling arms gun owners with legal firepower to challenge other unconstitutional laws. But the fight isn't over. States will try to impose new restrictions. The battle becomes more local and complex. Anti-gun forces won't give up. Vigilance is essential. Today's news is a restoration of constitutional principles. The Second Amendment is affirmed as the law of the land. This is a moment to celebrate and a call to action. The future is bright, but it must be defended.